Chapter 1. The Gift. The blood was the color of a winter sunset, deep and resonant in the crystal decanter. It caught the low light of the sconces, fracturing the flames into 1,000 crimson shards. Queen Elena watched the light play across the faceted surface, her fingers cool against the glass. The air in their private chambers was still, scented with the night-blooming jasmine that climbed the trellis outside their balcony, and the faint, clean scent of old paper from the king's adjoining study. It was a quiet evening, one of the rare ones that settled without the weight of courtly obligation. A small, perfect silence shared between two people who had no need for words. Sebastian, her king, her husband, was bent over a map on the far side of the room, the dark silk of his tunic pulling taut across the formidable line of his shoulders. A single line of concentration was etched between his brows. He was charting trade routes, a task he found strangely soothing. The neat, predictable flow of goods was a balm against the chaotic currents of politics. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour, and Elena loved him for it. Their companionship was a thing that could thrive in silence, a vast and comfortable country of its own. In the 3 centuries they had ruled together, they had learned the contours of each other's thoughts, the rhythm of each other's hearts. Sometimes Elena would look at him and feel a wave of such profound gratitude it nearly brought her to her knees. That this man, this brilliant, complex, occasionally impossible man, was hers. That in all the endless years of their immortal existence, they had found each other. She lifted the decanter, its weight familiar in her hand. The blood was a special vintage, sourced from a willing donor in the Southern Territories, known for its purity and a subtle, lingering warmth like mulled wine. A gift from Clan Volkov, presented with much ceremony 2 days prior. A gesture of fealty, their emissary had said, his smile thin and practiced. A tribute to the Queen's grace. Elena had accepted it with the polite detachment her station required, though she had never trusted the Volkovs. Their ambition was a poorly veiled thing, sharp and hungry beneath their courtly veneers. But refusing the gift would have been a diplomatic incident, a show of distrust that would ripple through the intricate web of alliances that held their kingdom together. She had mentioned her misgivings to Sebastian that very morning, as they had broken their fast together in the small dining room adjacent to their chambers. The Volkovs have always been ambitious, he had said, not looking up from the correspondence he was reviewing. But they are not foolish enough to act against us, not openly. And yet their gift feels like a test, Elena had replied, tracing the rim of her teacup with one finger. As if they're measuring how much deference we require. Sebastian had set down his letter then, giving her his full attention. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, had been warm with affection. Then we shall accept their tribute with grace, and show them that the crown's authority needs no measuring. You worry too much, my love. She had smiled at that, letting him take her hand across the table. One of us must worry, or you would spend all your time with your maps and leave the kingdom to govern itself. And it would probably do a better job of it, he had said, that rare, genuine smile touching his lips, the one he reserved only for her. The memory was warm, a small, perfect moment from just that morning. How quickly the world could change. Elena poured a measure of the blood into her glass, a heavy goblet of smoked obsidian. The liquid swirled, thick and dark. She raised it to her lips, the scent rich and metallic, a promise of vitality. The first sip was always the best, a rush of warmth that spread from her core, chasing away the inherent chill of their immortal existence. It was life, borrowed and savored. She took a slow, deliberate swallow, letting the warmth bloom in her chest. Then came the second taste. Not warmth, but fire. It was instantaneous and utterly alien, a searing chemical heat that was nothing like the gentle fire of life. It tasted of rusted iron and something else, something acrid and deeply, fundamentally wrong. Elena froze, the goblet halfway to her lips for a second sip. The fire in her throat was spreading, a spiderweb of agony branching through her veins. It was not the burn of strong spirit, but the corrosive burn of acid eating through her from the inside. She tried to set the goblet down, but her hand was already trembling. It slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble tabletop with a sharp crack. The obsidian didn't shatter, but the sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room, a gunshot in a cathedral. Sebastian looked up, his concentration broken. His eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment he understood that something was catastrophically wrong. The blood drained from his face. In 300 years of marriage, she had seen him angry, frustrated, even occasionally afraid in the heat of battle. But she had never seen this. This was terror, raw and absolute. "Elena," he said, and his voice was calm, but he was already moving, crossing the room in 2 silent, fluid strides. The map forgotten, scattered to the floor, ink spilling across ancient trade routes that no longer mattered. She tried to speak, to warn him, to tell him not to touch the blood, but her throat was closing. The fire was in her lungs now, each breath a gasp of shredded glass. She could feel it moving, a malevolent intelligence traveling through her bloodstream, seeking, destroying. Her vision began to tunnel, the edges blurring into a wavering gray. The beautiful, quiet room, the tapestries they had chosen together in Florence, the flickering sconces he had commissioned from a master craftsman in Prague, his beloved face, all of it receded as if she were falling backward into a deep, dark well. "What is it?" he demanded, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. His touch was usually a comfort, a grounding force that could pull her back from any darkness. Now it was just a distant pressure, barely felt through the wall of agony. She managed to lift a shaking hand, pointing to the goblet, to the decanter. Her lips formed a single, soundless word. Poison. The change in him was terrifying. For a fraction of a second, his composure, the unshakable calm that defined King Sebastian, shattered completely. Raw, untempered fury flashed in his eyes, so potent it was nearly visible, a wave of heat in the air. It was the rage of a god, of something ancient and terrible that had been sleeping beneath the facade of civilization. It was followed instantly by a colder, sharper emotion: fear. It was the fear that broke her heart. In all their centuries together, through wars and plagues and the slow, grinding weight of immortal existence, she had never seen him afraid. Not truly. Not like this. A low moan escaped her lips, a sound of pure animal suffering that she couldn't contain. Her body was betraying her, each cell screaming as the poison unmade her from within. "No," Sebastian said, and it was not a plea. It was a refusal, a denial issued to fate itself. "No, you don't get to leave me. Elena, stay with me. Stay with me." He swept the decanter and the goblet off the table with a savage gesture. They shattered against the far wall, a crystalline explosion that sprayed the priceless tapestries with droplets of poisoned blood. He didn't spare them a glance. He was already gathering her into his arms, her body suddenly weightless, boneless, a doll in his grasp. The pain was a living thing inside her now, coiling in her stomach, clawing at her heart. It had teeth, and it was eating her alive. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice a low, desperate growl against her hair. "Elena, you will hold on. That is an order from your king." Even through the pain, she wanted to laugh at that. As if her body would obey him the way his subjects did, as if death itself would bow to his authority. He carried her through the chambers, his long strides eating up the distance to the heavy oak doors. He kicked them open with such force they slammed against the stone walls, the sound echoing through the corridor like thunder. Guards snapped to attention, their faces masks of alarm as they saw the queen limp and pale in the king's arms, her head lolling against his chest. "Fetch healer Maeve," Sebastian snarled, his voice echoing in the stone corridor. "Tell her it is poison. Tell her to bring everything. Now. And send for Captain Thorne. I want every person who has touched that decanter found and brought to the throne room. Every single one." One guard took off at a sprint. Another stood frozen, staring. "Move!" Sebastian roared, and the man fled. The king's voice carried a note of such absolute authority, such barely contained violence, that Elena felt it even through her delirium. He was a king in this moment, yes, but more than that. He was something primal, something that would tear the world apart to protect what was his. They reached the royal chambers, and Sebastian laid her on their bed with a gentleness that contrasted violently with the fury radiating from him. He arranged the pillows beneath her head, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly. "Stay with me," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. "Please, Elena. Please don't leave me here alone." She wanted to comfort him, to reach up and touch his face, to tell him that she had no intention of leaving him, that 3 centuries was not nearly enough time. But the darkness was closing in, and all she could do was look at him, trying to memorize every line of his face as the world went gray. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her completely was a single tear sliding down his cheek. In 300 years, she had never seen him cry. Chapter 2: The Investigation. The world became a place of fractured moments, of agony and shadow. Elena drifted in a red-hot sea, aware only of the pain. It had a texture, like biting on sand, and a sound, a high, thin screaming that might have been her own. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the long, unbroken night of suffering, punctuated by brief, terrifying flares of clarity. In one, she saw Maeve's face. The healer was ancient even by their standards, her silver hair a halo in the candlelight, her face lined with the weight of centuries. But her hands were steady as they pressed cool cloths to Elena's forehead, as they tilted bitter draughts between her lips. Maeve drew vials of Elena's blood, her hands steady despite the urgency. "I need to isolate the toxin," she murmured, holding the dark vials up to the light. "Identify its structure before it's too late. Can you save her?" Sebastian's voice, rough and desperate. "I don't know." Maeve's honesty was brutal. "This is vein fire, my king. An ancient curse from the first wars. It burns the blood's memory, unmakes the body from within. I've found references in 3 different texts, fragments of possible treatments, but they're incomplete. There is no proven antidote." "Then you will create one." It was not a request. "Your Majesty, I have never attempted anything like this. The treatment itself could kill her faster than the poison." "Then you will make sure it doesn't." Sebastian's voice was soft, deadly. "I will burn down every library, interrogate every healer, tear open every tomb if I must. Bring me every scholar who has studied the first wars. Bring me alchemists, herbalists, blood mages if you must. She will not die. Do you understand me? She will not die." A pause, then, "I understand, my king. I will do everything in my power. I have already sent for 3 masters of ancient toxicology. We will work without ceasing until we find a way." Elena wanted to tell him that it was all right, that if this was her time, she had lived a full life, a life made beautiful by him. But the words wouldn't come, and the darkness pulled her back under. In another moment of clarity, she heard voices. Angry, frightened voices. "I swear to you, Your Majesty, I only transported the decanter from the Volkov emissary to the Queen's chambers. I never opened it, never touched the contents." This was followed by the sound of weeping. A servant, Elena thought dimly, one of the younger ones. And the seal. Sebastian's voice was cold, analytical. The voice he used when solving a problem. "Intact, sire. I would never. I have served the crown for 20 years. Please, you must believe me." "I believe you." The gentleness in his tone was unexpected. "You may go, but you will speak of this to no one. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you, Your Majesty. Footsteps retreating. Then another voice, deeper, military. Captain Thorne, we've traced the decanter's path, sire, from the Volkov estate to their emissary, Lord Gregor. He presented it to the Queen 2 days ago. The seal was indeed intact, until the Queen herself broke it. So the poison was in the blood when it left Volkov's hands. It would appear so, Your Majesty. But Lord Gregor is demanding an audience. He claims he knows nothing of poison, that Clan Volkov would never. I'm sure he does claim that. Sebastian's voice was arctic. Bring him to me. And Captain, have your men search the Volkov estate, every room, every cellar, every hidden corner. If there is evidence of Vanefire poison being created or stored, I want it found. And if Lord Gregor resists questioning? A pause. When Sebastian spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Then he will learn that resisting his king is unwise. Do whatever is necessary, Captain. My wife lies dying. I want the truth. Elena felt a surge of something through the pain. Pride, perhaps. Even in his anguish, he was being thorough, methodical. He would not act on rage alone. He would have proof. The darkness claimed her again, but this time she held on to that thought like a lifeline. Hours or days later, she couldn't tell, she surfaced to the sound of footsteps. Many of them. Bring him forward. That was Sebastian. His voice had changed. It was emptier now, devoid of all emotion. That, more than anything, terrified her. Your Majesty, I swear on my honor, I knew nothing of— Your honor? Sebastian's laugh was bitter, broken. You dare speak to me of honor, while my wife burns with Vanefire poison that came from your hands? I am merely the emissary. I delivered the gift as instructed by Lord Valerius. The seal was intact, the vintage was recorded, everything was done according to protocol. Captain Thorne, what did you find? The Volkov estate, Your Majesty. Thorne's voice was grim. In a hidden laboratory beneath the wine cellar, equipment for distilling poisons. And this. A pause. Elena could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke. A ledger, Thorne continued, dated 3 months ago. Orders for components consistent with Vanefire production. Nightshade essence, crystallized hemlock, basilisk venom, and correspondence between Lord Valerius and an alchemist known for work in forbidden toxins, a man who specializes in recreating poisons from the First Wars. No, Lord Gregor gasped. No, Lord Valerius would never. I don't understand. I understand perfectly. Sebastian's voice was so cold it could have frozen the sun. Your lord attempted to murder my queen, and you, Lord Gregor, were his instrument. Whether you knew it or not is irrelevant. Please, Your Majesty, I have a family, children. I would never knowingly harm the queen. She is beloved by all. You're right, she is beloved. By all. Most especially by me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lord Gregor, Sebastian said, his voice taking on a different quality now, measured and careful. I am going to ask you questions. If you answer them truthfully, if you provide me with every detail of Lord Valerius's operations, every name of those who might have been complicit, every scrap of information that might be useful, then I will believe in your innocence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Anything. I will tell you anything. Then tell me, who else knew? Who else was involved in this plot? Gregor's voice came quickly, desperately. Marcus, Lord Valerius's younger son. He was his father's confidant in all matters. I saw them in the laboratory once, though I didn't know what it was at the time. They dismissed me quickly when I entered. Marcus often spoke of the Queen's influence with resentment, echoing his father's views. And there was a courier, a man named Silas, who made frequent trips between the estate and the city. I don't know his purpose, but Lord Valerius always met with him privately. Anyone else? Anyone at court? Any other houses? No, Your Majesty, I swear it. Lord Valerius kept this close. He trusted no one outside his immediate family. He believed you had grown too dependent on the Queen's counsel, that she influenced your decisions too heavily. He spoke of it often, his resentment of her power, but I never imagined he would go so far. I never thought him capable of this madness. Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Take him to the West Tower, he said finally. Comfortable quarters, under guard. He is not to be mistreated, but he is not to leave. He will remain there until this matter is resolved. Your Majesty, you believe me? I believe you were a fool, but not a traitor, Sebastian replied. And depending on how this proceeds, Lord Gregor, you may yet have an opportunity to prove your loyalty to the crown in other ways. Your cooperation today has been noted. But for now, you will wait. Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you, Your Majesty. Footsteps receding again. Then Captain Thorne's voice, lower, more private. Your Majesty, what are your orders regarding Lord Valerius and his son Marcus? Sebastian's response was quiet, but Elena heard it clearly, cutting through her delirium. I will attend to them, personally. But not yet. Not while she still fights. Prepare the First Legion, full armor. When the time comes, we ride. And the time comes when, Your Majesty? When I know she will live, Sebastian said, and his voice cracked with raw emotion. When I know she will open her eyes and speak my name again. Then, and only then, will I leave her side to deliver justice. Elena wanted to call out, to tell him not to go, not to do anything rash. But the pain surged again, a wave of fire that drowned everything else, and she was lost once more to the darkness. Chapter 3. The Vigil. Time fractured further. Elena existed in a state between life and death, suspended in agony. She became aware of Sebastian's presence at her bedside, always there, a constant dark shape at the edge of her burning vision. He did not speak except to give orders to Maeve, to demand updates, to refuse to leave even when the healer begged him to rest. My king, you have not slept in 3 days. You must. I will sleep when she wakes. And if she doesn't wake? The silence that followed was devastating. She will wake, Sebastian said finally, and his voice held a desperate certainty that made Elena's heart ache. She will wake because I am not strong enough to exist in a world without her. She will wake because I am asking her to. She will wake because, his voice broke, because I need her to. Elena felt his hand take hers. His skin was cool, always cool, but now it felt like ice. He was afraid. Her Sebastian, who had led armies and conquered kingdoms, who had stared down death on 100 battlefields, was terrified. She tried to squeeze his hand, to let him know she was still there, still fighting, but her body wouldn't obey. I should have known, he said softly, and now he was speaking only to her, as if they were alone in the world. You told me you didn't trust them. You told me the gift felt wrong, and I dismissed your concerns. I told you not to worry. His grip on her hand tightened, desperate. If you die because I didn't listen to you, I will never forgive myself. Do you hear me, Elena? I will carry that guilt through eternity. So you have to wake up. You have to live, because I cannot bear the weight of losing you. I'm not strong enough for that. She wanted to tell him that he was the strongest person she had ever known, that his strength was not in his ability to bear loss, but in his capacity to love so deeply, so completely, that the thought of loss was unbearable. But all she could do was exist in the fire and hold on to the sound of his voice like an anchor. I went to the Volkov estate tonight, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I confronted Lord Valerius. I walked into his hall with Captain Thorne and 20 armed guards. He stood there, surrounded by his sons and his personal guard, and do you know what he did? He smiled at me. Actually smiled, as if he had done nothing wrong. Elena felt a surge of anger cut through the pain. How dare they reduce her to an obstacle, as if 3 centuries of partnership, of rule, of love meant nothing. I showed him the evidence, Sebastian said. The ledger, the correspondence, the testimony of his own emissary. I gave him a chance to confess, to beg for mercy, to show even a shred of remorse. Instead, he told me that you had too much influence over me, that you made me weak, that a strong king shouldn't let his queen have so much sway over matters of state, that removing you was necessary for the good of the kingdom. He fell silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was empty, cold and vast as the void between stars. I told him that he had made the greatest mistake of his very long life. I told him that there would be consequences, that he would see exactly what happens when someone tries to take from me the only thing in this world that matters. I told him I would return, and when I did, he would learn what true weakness looks like. Not the weakness of loving someone, but the weakness of underestimating how far that love will drive a man. And then I left. Because you were here, alone, dying, and I needed to be with you more than I needed revenge. Do you understand, Elena? I walked away from the man who poisoned you because the thought of you dying without me beside you was more unbearable than letting him go unpunished for even one more day. She felt wetness on her hand, tears. He was crying. But when you wake up, he said, and there was steel beneath the grief now, when you are well and whole and safe, then I will go back. Then I will show them what it means to threaten you. I will show them all. And God help me, Elena, I will not stop until they understand, until everyone understands. You are not just my wife, you are not just my queen. You are the reason I endure this endless existence. You are the light in an immortal darkness, you are everything, and I will make certain that no one ever forgets what happens when they try to extinguish that light. Chapter 4. The Counteragent. On the 4th day, something changed. Maeve burst into the room, her usual calm demeanor shattered by urgency and exhaustion. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days, her silver hair disheveled, dark circles under her ancient eyes. Your Majesty, I have it. I've pieced together a counteragent. Sebastian was on his feet instantly. Then administer it, now. My king, Maeve held up a hand, her expression grave. You must understand. This treatment has never been tested. I've synthesized it from the toxin I isolated from the Queen's blood, combining it with extracts mentioned in 3 separate texts from the First Wars. The sources contradict each other in places. I've had to make educated guesses about dosages and compounds. What are you saying? Sebastian's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm saying this counteragent could save her life. But the process will be, she hesitated, searching for words. The fire will battle the ice, my king. Vein fire burns, hot, consuming from within. The counteragent works by introducing an opposite force, a glacial cold that extinguishes the flames. But the war between these elements, the treatment itself could kill her. It could stop her heart, freeze her blood, shatter her mind. If we do nothing, she will certainly die. Today, within hours. Sebastian looked down at Elena, his face a mask of anguish. She could barely see him through the gray haze, but she could feel his presence, solid and real, the only fixed point in her disintegrating world. What are the chances it works? Maeve's voice was soft, compassionate. I don't know, Your Majesty. 30%? 50%? I'm working with fragments of knowledge from a war fought 3,000 years ago. I'm attempting medicine that may never have succeeded even then, but it's the only chance she has." Sebastian was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he reached down and took Elena's hand, holding it gently in both of his. His eyes never left her face. "Do it," he said quietly. "But Maeve, know this. If she dies during the treatment, if this kills her, I will not blame you. You have worked tirelessly to save her. You have given her a chance when there was none. No matter what happens, you will have my gratitude and my protection. Always." "Thank you, my king," Maeve whispered. Then she moved into action, 2 other healers entering behind her, carrying supplies. They positioned themselves around the bed, their movements practiced and precise. Sebastian was gently but firmly moved aside. He took up a position at the head of the bed, his hands on Elena's shoulders, anchoring her. "I'm here," he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm right here, my love. I'm not going anywhere. Stay with me. Just stay with me through this." Elena felt the prick of a needle in her arm. For a moment, nothing happened. The fire continued its relentless work, burning her from the inside out, and she thought perhaps the treatment had failed before it even began. Then the ice came. If the vein fire had been terrible, this was apocalyptic. The counter-agent was cold beyond anything she had ever experienced, a cold so profound it felt like it would crack her bones, shatter her into 1,000 frozen pieces. It entered her veins and spread like winter itself, absolute and merciless. And where it met the fire, there was war. The collision was cataclysmic. Fire and ice, 2 elemental forces locked in mortal combat inside the ravaged landscape of her body. She could feel them tearing her apart, each claiming territory, neither willing to yield. The pain transcended anything she had thought possible. It was white-hot and freezing cold simultaneously, a paradox that shattered her mind. She heard herself screaming, a sound that seemed to come from outside her body, primal and endless. "Hold her down!" Maeve's voice, urgent and afraid. Strong hands on her shoulders, her arms, her legs. Her body was convulsing, trying to escape the unbearable sensation. But there was nowhere to go, no escape from the war raging within. Sebastian's voice in her ear, steady and sure, a lifeline in the chaos. I'm here, my love. Stay with me, just a little longer. You can do this. You're the strongest person I know. You can survive this. Please, Elena, please stay with me. Don't leave me. Don't you dare leave me." His voice was breaking now, raw with desperation. "I love you. Do you hear me? I love you more than anything in this world or the next. You are my everything, my light, my reason. Stay with me. Fight. Fight for us. Fight for all the centuries we still have ahead. Fight because I need you. Because I cannot do this without you. Please, Elena, please." The ice pushed deeper, a relentless glacier advancing through her veins. It extinguished the flames one by one, but each victory was agony. She could feel her body trying to shut down, to escape the unbearable sensation by simply ceasing to exist. It would be so easy, so peaceful, to just let go, to drift away from the pain. No, she thought with the last shred of her will. No, I will not leave him. She had no breath to speak, no strength to move, but she poured every ounce of her determination into staying present, staying alive. For him, for the man whose voice was the only real thing in a universe of pain. For the man who had sat by her bedside for 4 days without sleeping. For the man who loved her with such desperate, terrifying intensity that he would burn the world to keep her safe. She would not leave him alone in the darkness. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Fire and ice, life and death, locked in mortal combat inside her failing body. She was dimly aware of Maeve chanting something in an ancient language, of other healers rushing in with supplies, of Sebastian's unwavering presence beside her, his hands gentle but firm, keeping her grounded when she wanted nothing more than to fly apart. And then, gradually, impossibly, the pain began to recede. It did not vanish, but drew back, like a tide going out, leaving the wreckage exposed on the shore. The fire was gone, quenched by the relentless ice. The ice itself was fading, its work done, leaving behind an aching, hollow emptiness. She could breathe. It hurt, each inhalation a reminder of what she had endured, but she could breathe. "Her pulse is stabilizing," Maeve said, and there was wonder in her voice. "The vein fire is neutralized, the counter-agent is dispersing. My king, I think she's going to survive." The sound Sebastian made was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 4 days and could finally exhale. It was the sound of someone who had been standing on the edge of an abyss and had just been pulled back from the brink. "Elena," his voice was hoarse, wrecked. "Can you hear me?" She managed the smallest nod, the barest movement of her head against the pillow. It took every ounce of strength she possessed. But she did it. She opened her eyes, just a fraction, just enough to see him. His face was ravaged by sleeplessness and fear, tears streaming down his cheeks openly now. But his eyes were bright with hope, with relief, with love so profound it was almost unbearable to witness. "Thank God," he whispered, and his forehead came to rest against hers, his hand cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "Thank God. Welcome back, my love. Welcome back." She tried to speak, but her throat was too raw. All she could do was be present, be alive, and feel the weight of his relief settling over her like a blanket. The worst was over. She had survived. "Rest now," he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheekbone gently. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Rest and heal and come back to me fully. I'll be right here when you wake. I promise." And for the first time in 4 days, Elena slept without pain, without fire, without the terror of the darkness. She slept knowing that he was beside her, that he would guard her against anything, that she was loved with a depth and fierceness that could move mountains. She slept and she healed, and she dreamed of him. She dreamed of his voice calling her back from the darkness. She dreamed of 300 years of love and all the centuries still to come. She dreamed of a love so powerful it had refused to let her go, even when death itself had come calling. Chapter 5. The Awakening. The first thing she became truly aware of was the weight of the blankets on her. They were heavy, made of wool and fur, and she was cocooned within them. The second was the silence. It was a profound, absolute quiet, deeper than the one she had cherished in their chambers on that last peaceful night before the poison. This silence had weight. It felt like newly fallen snow, beautiful and absolute, covering everything. She opened her eyes slowly, cautiously, half afraid the light would bring the pain surging back. But there was only a dull ache, manageable, almost comforting in its normality. The light was dim, filtered through heavy velvet curtains. She was in their bed. The room was the same, yet different. The shattered crystal was gone, the stain on the tapestry cleaned, but the air was changed. It held its breath, waiting. Sebastian was in the chair beside the bed, exactly where she had always sensed him. He wasn't looking at a map or reading a book. He was simply watching her, his hands resting on his knees. He looked terrible. The elegant lines of his face were sharpened to a razor's edge, new shadows carved beneath his eyes. His normally immaculate clothing was rumpled, his hair unkempt. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, scorched and weary, but still standing. But his gaze was clear, steady, and when he saw her eyes were open, the transformation was immediate. Life flooded back into his features, a sunrise after the longest night. Elena. Her name was a prayer of thanksgiving. She tried to speak, but her throat was a desert, parched and raw. A dry, rasping sound was all she could manage. Instantly he was there, a glass of cool water in his hand, his arm sliding beneath her to lift her head with infinite care. The water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. It was life itself, flowing back into her. "Easy," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her back. "Slowly. You've been gone for 6 days. Your body needs time to remember how to work." 6 days. She had been lost for 6 days. She could see it in him, the weight of those days, the toll they had taken. His hands, always so steady, trembled slightly as he held the glass. She drank, then lay back against the pillows, her body feeling like a fragile, hollow shell. But she was alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. "How long?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. 6 days since you first drank the poison, he said, setting the glass aside. 4 days of the vein fire burning through you. Then Maeve administered the counteragent. That was 2 days ago. You've been sleeping since then, healing. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek, as if he needed to confirm she was real. "I thought I had lost you." "I thought," his voice broke, and he had to pause, gathering himself. "I thought you were going to leave me alone in this endless existence. And I realized that every year I've lived, every century, only had meaning because you were in it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm still here." "Because you're stubborn and strong, and you refuse to let go," he smiled, but it was tremulous, uncertain. "You fought your way back to me. I knew you would. I told you to, and you've never been very good at defying your king." She managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. He held her through it, supporting her, his presence a solid anchor. "The Volkovs," she said when she could speak again. The memory was returning, piece by piece. It was them. The poison. Yes, it was them. Sebastian's voice was careful, controlled. "You found proof," she needed to know, needed to understand what had happened while she was lost in the fire. Captain Thorne searched their estate. "We found a hidden laboratory, equipment for creating vein fire, a ledger detailing the purchase of components, correspondence with an alchemist known for forbidden toxins." His voice was clinical, reciting facts. Lord Valerius ordered it done. His son Marcus was complicit. The emissary, Lord Gregor, delivered the poisoned blood unknowingly. Where is Lord Gregor now? In the West Tower, under guard, but in comfortable quarters. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place, but there was something in his tone, something in the set of his shoulders, that made her uneasy. "He provided testimony," Sebastian continued, "names, details about his lord's operations, Marcus's involvement. He has proven his innocence and his willingness to cooperate. When this is over, I intend to offer him a position in our diplomatic corps, far from his former home. A chance to prove his loyalty to the crown." "And Lord Valerius?" "That," Sebastian said softly, "is a conversation we should have when you are stronger." "Sebastian, please, Elena." He took her hand in both of his, holding it as if it were made of glass. "You nearly died. You came so close to leaving me that I could feel the void opening up beneath my feet. Let me have this moment. Let me just be grateful that you're alive and awake and here." The raw emotion in his voice stopped her protests. She squeezed his hand, feeling the coolness of his skin, the solid reality of him. "I'm here," she said again, because it seemed to be what he needed to hear. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me," he whispered against her skin, lifting her hand to his lips. "Promise me you'll never leave me. I know it's selfish. I know it's impossible. But promise me anyway." "I promise," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "For as long as I exist, I am yours." He closed his eyes, and she saw a tear slip down his cheek. This strong, powerful king, brought to tears by relief and love, and the simple gift of her survival. "Rest now," he said finally, carefully laying her hand back on the blankets. "Sleep and heal. I'll be right here. I'm not leaving your side." "Sebastian," she murmured, sleep already pulling at her. "Whatever you're planning to do about the Volkovs, be careful." He smiled, and it was sad and tender and loving. "I'm always careful, my love." But as she drifted off to sleep, she wondered if that was entirely true. She had seen something in his eyes when he spoke of Lord Valerius, something cold and final and absolute. It worried her. But she was so tired, and he was there, and she was safe. She would worry about the Volkovs later. For now, she would simply be alive. Chapter 6. The Recovery. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet recovery and unnerving silence. Elena's strength returned slowly, like a tide creeping back up a ravaged shore. First, it was sitting up in bed without the room spinning. Then it was walking, her hand clutching Sebastian's arm, her legs unsteady beneath her. Each small victory was hard won, each step forward a triumph. Sebastian was a constant, attentive presence. He read to her from books of poetry, his voice a low, steady murmur that soothed her frayed nerves. He brought her meals himself, refusing to let servants tend to her, as if he didn't trust anyone else with her care. He fed her when her hands trembled too much to hold a spoon, patient and gentle, never showing frustration at her weakness. He was the most tender of nurses, the most devoted of husbands. And yet, something had changed. It was in the way he stood by the window for hours, staring out at the city below without truly seeing it. It was in the long periods when he would leave the castle, always after midnight, dressed not in the silks of a king, but in the dark, practical leathers of a warrior. He would return just before dawn, and she would wake to find him removing his boots in the darkness, his movements careful and quiet, so as not to disturb her. But she could smell it on him, the cold night air, the scent of steel, and sometimes, faintly, smoke and ash. "Where do you go?" she asked him one morning, after he had returned with the dawn, and was sitting beside her bed, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. He smiled, and it was sad and gentle, and did not reach his eyes. "Tending to the garden." "What garden?" "The kingdom. There were weeds that needed removing." The metaphor was clear, but she pressed anyway. "Sebastian, what have you done?" He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I have done what needed to be done to ensure your safety. That's all you need to know right now. When you're stronger, when you're well, we can discuss the details. But for now, just focus on healing." There was steel beneath the gentleness. He would not be moved on this. Elena wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the truth was she was still too weak to sustain a real fight, and a part of her, a small, quiet part, was afraid of what she would learn if she pushed too hard. So she let it rest, for now. Her court, when she was finally well enough to receive them, treated her with a new kind of reverence. They looked at her as one who had returned from the dead, which, she supposed, she had. Lady Miriam wept openly when she saw Elena sitting up in bed, receiving visitors. Lord Chancellor Aldrich actually got down on one knee, pressing his forehead to the back of her hand, in a gesture of profound relief and fealty. But when they looked at the king, their fear was of a different quality altogether. It was stark and absolute, the kind of fear usually reserved for natural disasters or acts of God. The whispers in the corridors fell silent when he passed. The boisterous energy of the royal court had been replaced by a hushed, watchful solemnity. The entire castle felt like it was holding its breath. Elena began to piece it together from fragments, from the things that were not said. A trade minister, wringing his hands as he gave his weekly report, would mention the sudden, inexplicable collapse of the Volkov mining interests in the north. Most unfortunate, Your Majesty. Their investors all withdrew at once. Quite odd, as if someone had spread rumors of insolvency. The banks called in their loans simultaneously. Unprecedented. A general, reporting on border patrols, would speak of villages in the Volkov outer territories found empty. The strangest thing, Your Majesty, we found notices posted in every settlement offering generous relocation stipends to anyone who wished to renounce the Volkov name and swear fealty to the crown. New lands, new opportunities, safe passage guaranteed. Most accepted within days. The villages were peacefully abandoned. Families left with royal escorts, resettled in the eastern provinces with land grants. As for the Wolf's Maw fortress itself, well, the general's voice had dropped uncomfortably. Those who chose to remain loyal to the Volkov name, they're still there, surrounded. An archivist, her face pale, would stammer an apology that certain historical records seemed to have been damaged. I'm not sure how it happened, Your Majesty. We discovered it during a routine cataloging. Some of the more detailed accounts of Volkov holdings and achievements, the records of their greatest triumphs, seem to have been removed. Very precisely, very specifically. The general histories remain intact, of course. The name Volkov still appears in our records, but the details of their power, their influence, those seem to be incomplete now. Most unfortunate. No one would meet her eyes when they spoke of these things. If she pressed, they would grow flustered, murmuring that the king was overseeing the matter directly. It was all being handled. But she heard other things, too. Things that made her blood run cold despite the warmth returning to her body. A maid speaking in hushed tones to another servant outside her door, not realizing the queen could hear. They say the king himself is at the Wolf's Maw, that he collapsed the mountain pass after giving everyone a choice. 3 weeks he waited, they say. 3 weeks for anyone who wanted to leave to come out. Most did. But those who stayed, those who chose to stand with House Volkov even after the evidence of treason, the maid's voice dropped to a whisper. They say when they sent someone out to negotiate, the king sent back a message that there would be no terms, no mercy. Another fragment, this one from Captain Thorne himself, speaking with one of his lieutenants in the corridor. The king's orders were explicit. When the fortress falls, it is to be destroyed completely, not captured, destroyed. The walls are to be pulled down, the towers collapsed, the foundations broken, and the fields surrounding it are to be salted. He wants nothing to grow there for generations to come. Elena lay in her bed that night, staring at the canopy above her, and felt a cold dread settling in her bones. She knew Sebastian, knew his capacity for strategy, for calculated action. But this systematic, methodical destruction spoke of something beyond strategy. This was personal. This was consuming. This was obsession. She thought of the man who had sat beside her bed for 6 days, who had refused to sleep until she woke. The man who had wept tears of relief when she spoke his name. The man who had looked at her with such desperate, terrifying love that it had shaken her to her core. What would such a man do to those who had tried to take her from him? The answer, she was beginning to realize, was anything, everything, whatever it took. 3 months to the day after she had first sipped the poison, Elena felt like herself again. The physical weakness was gone, replaced by a restless energy. The ghost of the pain was finally laid to rest. She stood on her balcony, the one scented with jasmine that had bloomed despite the autumn chill, and looked out over the city. It was a clear night, the stars sharp and cold in the black sky. The kingdom was at peace, a deep, profound, and unsettling peace. Sebastian came to stand beside her. he placed his heavy cloak over her shoulders, the fur lining soft against her neck. It smelled like him, like paper and ink and the faint, lingering scent of the night air he spent so much time in. For a long moment, they stood in shared silence. It was almost like the silence they used to share, before the poison. But not quite. This silence was heavier, weighted with all the things neither of them was saying. "I am calling a full session of the Grand Council for tomorrow," she said finally, her voice steady. She did not look at him. "It is past time we addressed what the Volkovs did. Their clan must be formally censured, their lands stripped, their titles revoked. They must be made an example of, so that no one else ever dares to threaten the crown in such a manner." She felt him grow even more still beside her, if that were possible. "There is no need," he said quietly. "No need?" She turned to face him then, her frustration finally breaking through. "Sebastian, they tried to murder me. They declared war on this crown, on this family. To do nothing is to show weakness. It is an invitation for others to try the same." "I did not say that nothing was done," he replied, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. "I said there is no need for a council meeting." The cold knot in her stomach tightened. "What did you do?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Part of her had known since the moment she woke up and saw the new shadows in his eyes. He turned to look at her fully then. His face in the starlight was calm, but his eyes held something vast and cold and final. It was the look of a man who had made a terrible choice and had long since made peace with it. "Would you like to know?" he asked softly. "Truly? Because once I tell you, Elena, you can never unhear it. You can never unknow what I have done in your name." She wanted to say no, wanted to turn away, to preserve the illusion of ignorance, to let whatever he had done remain in the dark where it belonged. But she was a queen, and queens did not have the luxury of willful blindness. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me everything." Chapter 7. The Confession. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. Then he nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Very well. You deserve the truth." He turned back to the city, his hands resting on the stone balustrade. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational, as if he were discussing the weather or the state of the harvest. "I went to Lord Valerius the first night," he began, "the night you fell ill. After Captain Thorne confirmed the evidence, after I knew with certainty that it was the Volkovs who had poisoned you, I took 20 armed guards and I walked into his hall." Elena said nothing, just listened, her heart beating too fast in her chest. He was in his study, surrounded by his sons and his advisors. Marcus stood at his right hand. They knew why I had come. I could see it in their faces. But do you know what Lord Valerius did when I presented him with the evidence? When I showed him the ledger, the correspondence, the testimony of Lord Gregor? Sebastian's knuckles whitened as his grip on the stone tightened. He smiled. Actually smiled, as if this were all some grand game of strategy that he had executed particularly well. "He told me that you had too much influence, that you were making me weak, making me sentimental, that a king should rule with strength, not love, that removing you was regrettable, but necessary for the good of the kingdom." The words hung in the cold air between them. "He called your death necessary," Sebastian said, and now there was emotion in his voice, a deep, aching sorrow. "As if you were a problem to be solved. As if 300 years of your wisdom, your grace, your strength meant nothing. As if you were expendable." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I realized in that moment that there was no reasoning with him, no justice that could be served through proper channels. Because men like him don't understand justice. They only understand power. "What did you do?" Elena asked, though her mouth was dry. I told him that he had made a grave mistake, that he had tried to take from me the only thing in this world that could never be replaced. I told him that there would be consequences, that he would see exactly what it truly meant to lose everything. Sebastian's voice was steady now, emptied of emotion. Marcus stood beside his father, defiant, proud, unrepentant. I could see in his eyes that he shared his father's views completely, that he believed what they had done was justified. And then I left. I walked out of his hall, past his guards, past his sons who stared at me with defiance and fear. I came back to you, because you were still fighting, still alive, and I needed to be there when you woke up. "But you went back," Elena said. It wasn't a question. "After Maeve administered the counteragent, after you survived the treatment, after I knew, truly knew, that you would live. Yes, I went back." His expression was unreadable. "I took the First Legion. We rode at night. We arrived at the Volkov estate at dawn. This time, I did not come to talk." "What did you do to them?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "Lord Valerius and his son Marcus were executed for treason, for attempted regicide. It is within my rights as king. The law is clear on this matter." He paused, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. They were given a chance to confess, to show remorse. Marcus refused to even speak. Valerius claimed he had acted for the good of the realm. So I carried out the sentence for treason. It was quick. I am not a torturer, Elena. I did not make them suffer unduly. But I wanted them to understand, in their final moments, exactly what they had lost, what they had gambled and failed to win. And then I began the work of ensuring that no one else would ever make the same mistake. Sebastian turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I dismantled their power base, Elena, completely and systematically. I purchased their debts through intermediaries, spread carefully crafted rumors of insolvency through the financial markets, triggered a collapse of investor confidence. Within 3 weeks, the great house of Volkov was bankrupt. Their allies, seeing their weakness, were eager to distance themselves and pledge loyalty to a stronger power. I gave them that opportunity. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Their territories. Before I moved a single soldier, I sent heralds to every village, every town, every settlement in Volkov lands. A proclamation. Any person who renounced the name of Volkov and swore fealty to the crown would receive a generous relocation stipend, new lands in the eastern provinces, safe passage with royal escorts. I gave them 3 weeks to decide. The villages and outer territories, Elena murmured. Yes. Most were sensible. They understood that their lord had committed treason and that their future lay with the crown, not with the dying house. Within 2 weeks, entire villages had been peacefully relocated. Families left with their possessions, escorted by my soldiers, given new lands and new opportunities. They chose survival and prosperity over a doomed name. And those who didn't choose? Those who remained loyal to House Volkov retreated to the Wolf's Maw Fortress, the ancestral stronghold in the mountains. Perhaps 200 souls, mostly the personal guard and the most devoted retainers. After the outer territories were empty, after everyone who wanted to leave had left, then I moved the legions into position. And then I collapsed the mountain pass, the only supply route. Elena felt a tremor run through her, a deep, primal fear that had nothing to do with poison and everything to do with the man standing before her. I surrounded the fortress with soldiers, and I waited. For 3 weeks, I waited. And what happened? They sent out an emissary on the 21st day. A young captain waving a white flag, asking to discuss terms of surrender. Sebastian's voice dropped even lower. I sent back his body with a message. There would be no terms, no negotiation, no mercy. They had chosen to stand with a house that had committed treason, and they would share that house's fate. On the final night, after they were too weak from hunger to resist effectively, I went in with the First Legion. We took the fortress. Those who laid down their arms immediately were taken prisoner. Those who fought were killed in battle. It was over in hours. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the cold night air. And then I burned it. I had my men pile everything that would burn, every tapestry, every book, every piece of furniture, every portrait of every Volkov who had ever lived, and I set it alight. I watched the wolf's mob burn until there was nothing left but smoke and ash and blackened stone. And then I had the walls torn down. The towers collapsed, the foundations broken. I had the fields surrounding it salted so nothing would grow there easily for generations to come. But that wasn't the end, was it? Elena asked, her voice shaking. No, Sebastian said quietly. The final step was the archives. I personally oversaw the revision of our kingdom's records. Not the general histories, those remain. The name Volkov still exists in the historical record. I am not trying to pretend they never lived. But their great achievements, their proudest moments, their most significant holdings, the detailed records of their power and influence, all of that has been removed. Carefully, precisely. In 2 generations, there'll be a footnote in history. In 5, barely remembered. In 10, a cautionary tale at best. He fell silent. The story was told. Elena stared at him, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She saw it all now. The late nights, the smell of smoke, the fear in the eyes of her courtiers. While she had been fighting for her life, he had been systematically unmaking a dynasty, wiping a rival clan from power with the patient, meticulous care of a scholar correcting a flawed text. "What did you do?" she whispered again. But the question had a new meaning. It was no longer a request for information. It was an accusation, an expression of sheer, uncomprehending horror. Sebastian finally showed a flicker of emotion. It was a deep, aching sadness. "They tried to kill you," he said simply, as if this were the only explanation required, the only truth that mattered in the universe. And I could not let that stand. I could not let anyone believe that threatening you was acceptable, that it was survivable. I needed to send a message so clear, so absolute, that no one would ever dare make the same mistake. The simplicity of it was more shocking than the litany of his deeds. In his mind, the equation was perfect. The scales were balanced. An attempt on her life was a transgression so absolute that the only fitting response was absolute annihilation. He had not just punished them, he had voided their power, their influence, their legacy. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sharp. They were not tears of gratitude, or even of fear, but of a profound and terrible awe. She was looking at the purest, most terrifying expression of love she had ever known. It was a love that would burn down the world to keep her safe, a love that saw no moral complexity, only a single shining imperative: her life. "You're a tyrant," she breathed, the words torn from her. It was all she could think to say. It was a protest, a plea, a statement of fact all at once. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheekbones. His touch was as tender as it had been when she was at her weakest. The same hands that had held a cup of water to her lips had also signed death warrants and held torches to burn a fortress. The contradiction was dizzying. "For you," he said, his voice soft, intense, and utterly sincere. "There is no such thing as going too far." For you, I would do anything. I would become anything. I would damn my soul 1,000 times over if it meant keeping you safe." In his eyes, she saw no monster. She saw only a man who had been forced to watch the center of his world burn, who had sat helpless for 6 days while the love of his life fought for survival, and who had decided, in the cold calculus of his grief and rage, that he would remake the world before he allowed it to happen again. It was horrifying. It was wrong. It was a sin that would stain his soul for eternity. And it was all for her. This knowledge was a terrible burden and a strange, profound comfort. To be loved so completely, so absolutely, was to be both cherished and caged. He had built a fortress around her, not of stone, but of fear. The message to any who might wish her harm was now written in the ash and silence of what was once Clan Volkov. Touch her, and you will cease to matter. Touch her, and you will be erased. She leaned into his touch, her tears finally spilling over, tracing cold paths down her cheeks. She did not pull away. She did not condemn him. What he had done was unforgivable, a brutal act of tyranny that would echo through their kingdom for centuries. But it was also an act of love so primal and possessive that it defied all judgment. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his. The silence between them returned, but it was a new kind of silence now. It was the silence of a shared, terrible truth. The silence of two people bound together not just by affection and history, but by the smoking ruin of an entire house's power. He had remade the world into a safer place for her, and in doing so, had remade himself into something she would have to learn to live with. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," she whispered against his chest. "I don't need your forgiveness," he replied softly, pulling her close. "I need your understanding. And I need you to know that I will never apologize for keeping you safe, even if my methods were harsh, even if they were wrong." She pulled back enough to look up at him. His face was open, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. He was giving her a choice, she realized. He was laying bare the darkest parts of himself and asking her to decide if she could still love him, knowing what he was capable of. Could she? She thought of the 300 years they had shared, the battles they had fought together, the kingdom they had built, the quiet evenings spent in comfortable silence. She thought of the way he made her laugh, the way he challenged her mind, the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in all of creation. She thought of the man who had sat beside her bed for 6 days without sleeping, holding her hand, refusing to let her go. And she realized that she didn't have a choice. Not really. She loved him. All of him. Even the parts that frightened her. Even the parts that were stained with blood and ash. "I don't forgive you," she said finally, her voice steady despite her tears. "What you did was wrong. It was excessive and cruel, and will haunt this kingdom for generations." He nodded, accepting this. "But I understand why you did it." "And she took a shaky breath, "I would be lying if I said that some dark, terrible part of me isn't grateful. That some part of me doesn't feel safer, knowing that you loved me enough to do the unforgivable." His eyes searched hers, hope and fear warring in their depths. "You are ruthless and merciless, and you have committed terrible acts in the name of love," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "And I love you anyway," she finished. "God help me, Sebastian. I love you anyway." The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. He pulled her close again, holding her as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip. "Thank you," he breathed against her hair. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being alive." They stood there on the balcony as the night deepened around them, two immortal beings bound together by love and darkness and a shared, terrible knowledge. The jasmine continued to bloom, oblivious to the weight of what had just passed between them. The stars continued their cold watch above, and in the distance, where Clan Volkov had once stood proud and powerful, there was only silence and ash, and the empty space where their influence used to be. Chapter 8. The New Normal. In the days and weeks that followed, a new equilibrium established itself in the court and in their marriage. The name Volkov was never spoken in official capacity with the weight it once carried. It existed in historical records as a house that had once existed and then faded from power, their fall attributed to financial mismanagement and poor leadership decisions. The truth, the systematic dismantling, the executions, the erasure of their legacy, remained unspoken but universally understood. Other houses, once rivals or potential threats, were now models of deference and loyalty. Trade flourished. The borders were secure. The kingdom was peaceful, stable, and prosperous. It was a peace bought with blood and maintained through fear. Elena could see it in the way courtiers avoided her eyes, as if afraid that meeting her gaze would remind the king of how precious she was, how far he would go to protect her. She was, she realized, no longer just the queen. She was a symbol, a line that could not be crossed without catastrophic consequences. It was isolating and strange and, in its own way, a kind of cage. But she had chosen this. She had looked into the darkness Sebastian had embraced and decided to stand beside him anyway. She had made her peace with being both cherished and weaponized, both loved and feared. Their private moments, at least, remained their own. Sebastian was attentive without being smothering, affectionate without being desperate. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a terrible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The shadows in his eyes faded, replaced by something calmer, more settled. He had done what he needed to do. He had eliminated the threat and ensured it could never rise again. And now he could simply love her without the gnawing fear of loss. One evening, about 4 months after the poisoning, they were walking in the royal gardens. The air was cool and crisp, autumn giving way to early winter. The first frost had touched the roses, silvering their petals. Elena stopped beside a rose bush, its blooms a deep, velvety crimson. For a moment, the memory returned, the color of the blood in the decanter, the fire, the pain. But it was distant now, muted, a scar rather than an open wound. She shivered, not from cold, but from memory. Instantly, Sebastian was there, his cloak settling around her shoulders, his arm a solid, warm presence at her back. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern threading through his voice. She looked at the roses, then up at his face. She saw the unwavering devotion there, the absolute certainty that he would do anything to keep her safe. She saw the king who ruled with an iron fist and the man who loved with a terrifying, all-consuming heart. They were one and the same. They always had been. "I'm all right," she said softly. Then, with complete honesty, "I'm safe, I'm loved, and I'm with you. That's all that matters." His expression softened into something beautiful and tender and deeply grateful. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he said quietly. "The fact that you can stand here, knowing what I've done, and still choose to be with me, I don't deserve that grace." "Perhaps not," she agreed, "but you have it anyway. That's what love is, isn't it? Choosing someone even when they don't deserve it. Even when it would be easier not to." "Is it?" he asked, a hint of his old humor returning. "I thought love was supposed to be simple, pure, uncomplicated." She laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "If you wanted simple love, you married the wrong person. I'm far too complicated for that." "I wouldn't have you any other way," he said, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness it made her heart ache. They continued their walk, two figures moving through the twilight garden. To any observer, they would have looked like any royal couple enjoying a quiet evening together. No one would have guessed at the darkness they carried, the terrible choices they had made and accepted. But Elena could feel it, a permanent thread connecting them now. The knowledge of what he had done for her, the acceptance of what she had chosen despite that knowledge. It was heavy, that knowledge. But it was also, in its own twisted way, beautiful. To be loved so completely, so absolutely, that someone would reshape the world to keep you safe. There was something profound in that. Something that transcended simple morality and entered the realm of myth. She thought of the empty spaces in the detailed archives, the rubble where the wolf's maw had stood, the villages that had been emptied and resettled. All of it was a monument to his love, carved in absence and silence. It was terrible, it was wrong, it was unforgivable, and it was hers. "Sebastian," she said, as they reached the far end of the garden, where a stone bench overlooked the city lights below. "Yes, my love? Promise me something." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Anything. Promise me that this is the end of it. That you won't," she struggled to find the words, "that you won't let your need to protect me turn you into something you're not. That you'll remember there are lines even we shouldn't cross." He was quiet for a long moment, considering this. "I can't promise I won't do whatever it takes to keep you safe," he said finally. "That's beyond my power to promise. But I can promise that I will try to be measured, that I will consider the costs, that I won't act rashly or cruelly unless absolutely necessary, that I will verify my evidence before I act, that I will give people choices when I can." It wasn't the promise she wanted, but it was the one he could give. And perhaps it was enough. "Then that will have to do," she said. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know what I am, Elena. I know what I've become. But I also know that I would rather be a monster who kept you safe than a good man who lost you. That may make me selfish. It may make me wrong. But it makes me honest." "Yes," she agreed quietly. "It does." They sat on the bench, looking out over their kingdom. The lights of the city twinkled like stars, peaceful and serene. The people below had no idea of the darkness that had swept through their rulers, the price that had been paid for their continued prosperity. Perhaps that was for the best. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked suddenly. "The things you did?" "No," Sebastian said immediately. Then, more thoughtfully, "But I think about them. I carry them. Every decision, every consequence. It's a weight I'll bear for the rest of my existence. But no, I don't regret it. How could I, when you're here beside me?" She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat in silence, watching the night deepen around them. "I love you," she said softly, "even knowing everything, even understanding what it cost. I love you." "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than is sane, more than is safe, more than is probably healthy for either of us. But completely, eternally, without reservation or regret." It was a love that had been tested by poison and fire, by darkness and moral compromise. It was a love that had looked into the abyss and chosen to leap anyway. It was a love that would be written in history books with confusion and horror and fascination. But it was theirs, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 1 year later. A year had passed since the night Elena drank from the poisoned decanter, and the kingdom had never been more prosperous. Trade routes flourished, the borders were secure, the people were content, and at the heart of it all were the king and queen, ruling with a perfect balance of strength and grace. Elena had fully recovered, her strength returned and her spirit undimmed. She sat in council meetings with the same sharp intelligence she always had, her counsel valued and respected by all. She walked through the city streets, beloved by her people, who saw in her a queen who had survived the impossible. What they didn't know, what they could never know, was the price of that survival. The darkness that had been embraced, the lines that had been crossed, the terrible love that had reshaped their world. Sebastian remained the perfect king, just, fair, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to threats against the crown or his queen. But those who knew him well, who had seen the transformation that had occurred during those 6 terrible days, understood that he was also something else. He was a man who had looked into the void of loss and had decided that he would rather damn his soul than accept it. And he would do it again without hesitation. One evening, Elena found him in his study, bent over a map as he had been that night so long ago. The sight made her heart clench with memory and affection. She crossed the room quietly and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Hello, my love," he murmured, setting down his pen. "Come to drag me away from my work?" "Always," she said with a smile. "You spend too much time with these maps. The kingdom won't collapse if you take an evening to rest." He turned in her embrace, pulling her close. "Perhaps not, but I find the work soothing. The predictable flow of trade, the ordered movement of resources. After everything, I appreciate predictability." She understood what he meant. After the chaos of nearly losing her, the terror and rage and desperate action, he had found comfort in the orderly, the controlled. "I heard something interesting today," Elena said casually. "Lord Ashford's youngest son was making inquiries about my daily schedule, asking which routes I prefer for my morning walks, which guards accompany me." She felt Sebastian tense immediately, his arms tightening around her. Was he now? "It's probably innocent," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed that. "Perhaps he wishes to present me with a petition, or perhaps he's simply curious." "Or perhaps," Sebastian said, his voice dropping into something cold and dangerous, "he's considering whether the lesson taught by the Volkovs was clear enough." "Sebastian, I'll have Captain Thorne look into it," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Discreetly, thoroughly. If the boy's intentions are innocent, no harm done. If they're not," his voice hardened. "Well, we've established the precedent for how we handle threats to your safety. Just be sure this time," Elena said quietly. "Before you act, be absolutely certain." "I'm always certain," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I learned that lesson well. I won't make a move without proof, without verification. But if there is proof, if there is genuine threat, then I will do what needs to be done. You understand that, don't you?" "I do," she said, and found that she meant it. "I understand completely." He smiled, and it was both loving and slightly sad. "We're terrible people, aren't we? Sitting here calmly discussing potential investigations as if it were no more significant than the weather?" "Perhaps," Elena agreed. "Or perhaps we're simply people who have learned exactly how fragile happiness is, and how far we're willing to go to protect it." "When did you become so ruthless?" he asked, though there was admiration in his voice. "When you showed me what ruthlessness born of love looks like," she replied. "You can't expect me to remain unchanged after everything. You remade the world for me, Sebastian. It would be foolish to think that wouldn't remake me as well." He studied her face, searching for something. Then he nodded slowly. "We deserve each other," he said softly. "For better or worse, for light or darkness. We deserve exactly each other." "Yes," Elena agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. We do. It was not the sweet, innocent love of fairy tales. It was not the simple devotion of ballads and poetry. It was complex and dark, and probably unhealthy by any reasonable measure. But it was real. It was tested. It was forged in fire and poison and the terrible choices made in the face of loss. And it was strong enough to last through eternity. Later that night, as they lay in bed together, Sebastian's arms around her and her head on his chest, Elena thought about the young Lord Ashford and his unfortunate timing. She hoped, for his sake, that his interest in her schedule was truly innocent, because if it wasn't, if he was foolish enough to threaten her, then he would learn the same lesson the Volkovs had learned, that Sebastian's love for her was not a weakness to be exploited. It was a force of nature, implacable, relentless, absolute. And it would burn down the world before it let her go. She felt Sebastian's breathing slow and deepen as he drifted toward sleep, his hold on her never loosening. Even in rest, he held her as if she might disappear if he let go. I love you, she whispered into the darkness, too quietly to wake him. But perhaps he heard anyway, because his arms tightened just slightly, pulling her even closer. And in that moment, wrapped in the arms of her ruthless, devoted, terrifying king, Elena felt safer than she ever had in 3 centuries of existence. It was a safety bought with blood and ash, and the erasure of an entire house's power and influence from the heights they once occupied. But it was hers, and she would keep it, whatever the cost. In the city below, in the courts of other noble houses, in the whispered conversations of those who knew or guessed at what had truly happened, a new understanding had taken root. The king and queen were not to be trifled with. The queen was beloved, yes, but she was also untouchable, protected not just by law or guards or walls, but by something far more terrifying. She was protected by love, by a love so absolute, so consuming, so ruthless in its devotion, that it had erased an entire dynasty's power from the kingdom when they dared to threaten her. And that love, that terrible, beautiful, devastating love, would never rest, would never relent, would never stop watching. The kingdom was at peace, and it would remain at peace for as long as the king and queen drew breath. Because anyone foolish enough to disturb that peace would learn, as the Volkovs had learned, that some loves are not gentle. Some loves do not forgive. Some loves burn with a fire so hot, so pure, so absolute that they consume everything in their path. And Sebastian's love for Elena was exactly that kind of love. It was the love that would guard her through eternity, the love that would remake the world to keep her safe. The love that would, without hesitation or remorse, turn to ash anyone who tried to take her from him. She was his light in the darkness, his reason for existing, his everything. And he would make certain, for the rest of their immortal lives, that everyone knew it, that everyone understood it, that everyone feared it. Because fear, he had learned, was a form of protection. Fear kept people safe from their own foolish ambitions. Fear kept Elena safe. And that was all that mattered. Everything else, morality, mercy, restraint, was secondary to that single, burning imperative. Keep her safe. Keep her alive. Keep her his. For now and forever. Until the stars burned out and the world ended, she was his. And nothing would ever change that. The end.